How is it going, everybody? My name is DeMarco, and today I wanted to talk about backgrounds in Starfield. Something that there's a lot of varying different opinions on the best way to implement it, how it will be implemented, but I do think that there's some assumptions, and if you want a whole conversation about assumptions and hype and the danger that it can create, take a look at one of my last videos, the one right before this one, of course, if you feel so inclined. But I do think that there's some misinformation that is being spread around as fact, most likely because of the more recent Into the Starfield video that we received officially from Bethesda. But in this video, I want to have a discussion about the different ways that backgrounds could be implemented, about what might work best, at least in my opinion, for Starfield, and hopefully clear up some of the confusion around what officially confirmed details we have when it does come to backgrounds. So I hope you enjoy. If you disagree with anything that I say in this video, let me know in the comment section below, and if you enjoy, please do leave a like. Let's get into it. Throughout video game history, we've seen a wide variety of ways that backgrounds have been implemented. On one end of the spectrum, you have something like Cyberpunk 2077, which allowed you to actually play out the chosen background that you have, and picking Nomad versus Corpo was vastly different from one another, as you get to see different NPCs and you have different interactions. A whole new perspective of the city opens up as a result of the background that you pick. Of course, there are some cons to using such a system, right? I do think that some of those backgrounds, specifically the Nomad in particular, received more love than others, which would hamper some players' experiences who are looking forward to picking maybe Street Kid in Cyberpunk. But it also has its advantages. I think it's one of the most immersive ways to start off. Choosing your background has multiple lasting consequences on the experience, and on top of that, if you choose to play a second playthrough, you don't have to go through the exact same thing that you did before. It's one of the reasons why alternate start mods are so incredibly popular for Bethesda games, and I do think that bleeds into why a lot of folks are expecting that Bethesda might go the Cyberpunk route when it comes to backgrounds in Starfield, but that might not be the case. On the other end of the spectrum, you have something like the Outer Worlds, and they used occupations. I believe it was occupations in the Outer Worlds, and those more or less provided a stat boost. You pick the engineer background, and therefore you have +5 in melee weapons, but -5 per 2 persuasion, that sort of thing. And arguably, that could be seen as just as immersive in some ways, as it would make sense. You could justify, at least to yourself, why your character is running around beating their foes with a wrench in one hand. That's what I'm used to using. It's my tool of choice, and it's never let me down. Sure, you're not getting any kind of unique start to the game, but at least you have something that helps to define your character, which arguably is one of the most important things about a role-playing experience, is that you're not told what character you are. Then, of course, as the world works in shades of gray, there's something in between, which I would say is more like Mass Effect. Mass Effect, you get to choose your background, but it doesn't really have an alternate start to the game. You always begin as the same Commander Shepard, recruited for different reasons, all things considered, but nothing that directly affects your gameplay, or hell, even the first mission. Throughout the series of Mass Effect, your character's background and psych profile will be referenced and talked about, and dialogue options will change, and even some quests will be open to you that otherwise wouldn't be, based on the choices that you make. So there is some level of consequence towards what you pick. It's not just thrown in there for the sake of being thrown in there, and it was a good way to handle it. When I first came across one of my old street gang members from playing as an Earthborn in Mass Effect, that was pretty exciting. If you chose, I believe the other two were Spacer or Colonist, then you wouldn't get to have the same playthrough that I was, and that is cool. And they didn't necessarily need this whole opening spiel that provides players with wildly different experiences as a result in order to do that. Each system is effective in their own way, and I don't think one is necessarily better than the other, and players will have their preferences, and be sure to let me know what yours is down below. But it's important to note that one isn't necessarily wrong. So which way is the right way? I don't think there's really an answer to that. All of them have advantages and disadvantages that come with them. And we'll talk about the most recent Into the Starfield episode and what was said there about backgrounds and factions in just a little bit, as I know a lot of people are probably going to be bringing that up, or at least thinking it. But before we get into that, let's talk about the way that Bethesda has done it in the past. And that doesn't mean that they have to follow exactly what they've done historically this time. There's no reason why they can't change it up, but there is a reason why Bethesda designed their introductory levels the way that they did. One of the big things that Bethesda's quick to mention is having those step out moments, of which they said that there's 2 in Starfield. I'm excited to find out what those are, but in order to get those moments, it requires a highly structured and highly linear segment of the game in order to be led to that point. If we have Fallout, you begin always as a vault dweller, and it's that moment when you first escape from the vault. In a Elder Scrolls game, you begin as a prisoner, and whether it's Skyrim or Oblivion, you're escaping some kind of prison or sewer or any combination of dungeon that you possibly might find in order to get out into the open world. These tutorial areas serve a couple purposes, and Bethesda Todd Howard has actually talked about them in the past. It's in order to A, familiarize the player with exactly what the game is before they just throw them out into the open world, but it also gives them a feeling for the vibe, for the style, for the tone of the game, something that Todd Howard is very much on top of. What is the tone of Starfield, as we've heard before? These linear segments, it's not to say that Bethesda can't create multiple different ones of them, and again, I think the popularity of mods like Alternate Start prove that there's a desire to have more than just one vanilla opening to the game, but making sure that these spaces are confined to what Bethesda wants you to see when they want you to see it helps them to tell the story that they want to tell, while also enforcing the game's mechanics, which is a pretty solid way to handle it. But again, no reason why they can't make multiple versions of that. So, not the strongest argument, but something that I did want some of you to consider before we get into our next talking point, which is the most recent Into the Starfield video. During this Into the Starfield episode, Todd Howard talks about backgrounds and traits and returning to old features. It's not the first time we've heard the team talk about backgrounds, and for that reason, I think it's safe to say, yeah, it will be more than just some kind of stat boost that we see in the game. It's a pretty safe assumption. Will Shen explains how Ryujin Industries has one of the best starts, with a bit of a pause, to any of the factions in the game. We find out that you begin as a new hire to this megacorp in this cyberpunk kind of looking scenario here.
Ryujin Industries, which represents corporate life, I think it has one of the best starts of any of the factions we've done.
It's a megacorp, and you get hired, right? Like that you would do, right?
We'll play for our job. We'll see if you cut the mustard.
Right.
And this is where I think a lot of people have gotten tripped up. They've heard it's one of the best starts, and we've been talking about backgrounds previously elsewhere in this video, and so it's safe to make the connection that that means we get to start at Ryujin Industries, correct? But unfortunately, no. If we look at exactly what Will Shen is stating here, it's one of the best starts of the factions. And of course, all of the different factions will have different origins, but as opposed to, and I think why this one might have stood out versus some of the others in the game, if you try to join some kind of militaristic faction or some kind of sneaky faction, it will have this general vibe of being a new recruit, and joining into some kind of corporation, some kind of company is a direction that Bethesda hasn't really gone before. As a result, it's something that's a bit new, it's a bit expressive, it's a bit fresh for Bethesda to write this out and design this faction and how you interact with them, and as we see with Will Shen's statement, how you start in this company. Admittedly, I think the best situation when it comes to backgrounds in Starfield would be to go the Mass Effect route. Have something that you define that has consequences later on, which, again, Bethesda has stated how your background will impact the experience, but don't necessarily tie it to a specific opening. Make it as crisp, as clean, and as beautiful of an introduction to the world of Starfield. Keep in mind, this is the first time we're getting to experience this universe, and first impressions are everything. So if they wanted to dedicate that to one single opening to the game, I think that's time well spent. All in all though, that's just my take, and I'd love to hear what you guys have to say down in the comment section below. Thank you all so much for watching. Leave a like if you enjoyed, and as always, I hope to see you all next time. So long, everybody.